Hello and welcome to Thursday's Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast which dispenses with diplomatic niceties and cuts straight through to the closing conclusions for the day ahead in British politics.
My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico. With me from his home is Sam Coates of Sky News. It's Thursday morning and today, excitingly, finally, the Euros are coming home. That's right, it's the European Political Community Summit in Oxfordshire, the thing the nation has been waiting for all week. It's finally happening.
It's a little bit soon, Jack, for some people. Not for me, but for some, judging by chat this week. And what a week it's been. Finally, we got to see each other in person last night. Do you want to explain why?
Well, we were drinking together when we basically, Politico has a summer party at some fancy la-di-da place in Mayfair in some courtyard with a wall of wine and various other things, which our wonderful PR guy Hugo and our wonderful events team sorted out for us. And I actually got to see Sam Coates in the flesh. We used to see each other all the time, Sam, didn't we? And then we started doing this thing daily. And now I talk to you on Zoom every morning when I've barely had a cup of coffee. And we sort of blather bleary-eyed at each other on this podcast. And but no, it was nice to see you in person. Did you have a good time?
It was very good. I think you're the person I talked to second most in my life through the election campaign. Number one was the producer I worked with, Tom Larkin. And my wife was number three, but almost entirely virtually while recording a podcast. So it was nice to see you in person. Thank you for having us. Anyway, let's get on with today. What are the big three things for today in politics?
Yeah, the big thing in the UK is clearly this big summit in Oxfordshire. Keir Starmer hosting 40-odd European leaders for the day for the European Political Community Summit. We'll be getting into that. We are duty-bound to keep talking about America, and I suspect we're going to keep doing that through the course of the next few weeks and months. Joe Biden got COVID. J.D. Vance gave his first speech overnight as he was picked as the vice presidential candidate for Donald Trump, so we'll be getting into that as well. And back in the UK again, it is Public Inquiries Day. We have Ed Davey and Pat McFadden at the Post Office inquiry today, and the first part of the COVID inquiry report will be out at noon, which means the Tories, Sam, get relegated down from 2 minutes to about 30 seconds at the end, but we'll give you a quick update on the Tory leadership contest as well.
But the big thing today is over in Oxfordshire at Blenheim Palace. That's the birthplace of Winston Churchill. Today's the day that the summit that Rishi Sunak organised, but Keir Starmer has inherited, take place, where, I think it's around 47 political leaders turn up from not just Europe, but around Europe. The invite list stretches from Iceland to Switzerland to Turkey to Ukraine. And they all come. This is the European Political Community. It's the fourth meeting. It's a body that was set up by President Macron of France in October 2022, really to sort of try and forge European unity in the face of aggression by Russia. And they will gather in the splendour of that palace in order to talk, all things security, but particularly migration. Do you want to explain what's going to happen?
This is basically a gift bequeathed to Keir Starmer by Rishi Sunak. It was actually Liz Truss that agreed to host this summit a while back. Rishi Sunak set it all up, arranged the swanky palace for it, set the date, then called an election and lost his job. And so Keir Starmer comes in, and 2 weeks, the election was 2 weeks ago, can you believe it? 2 weeks into the job, I feel like about 1 billion years ago now, doesn't it? 2 weeks into the job, he suddenly finds he is sort of dolloped a serving of everyone who matters in Europe on his doorstep for him to go and meet and greet. I mean, Starmer was saying the other day when he was over at NATO in Washington, it would have took months to set up all these meetings for his team. Instead, he just gets to go and sort of speed date all these different leaders in one day at this palace. So it's brilliant diplomacy opportunity for him. You're right, they're going to be talking about migration. They're going to be talking about European security, big issues. There isn't any sort of big communique at these summits. They don't actually agree some big statement like you sometimes get at G7 summits. I don't think we're going to get a big round of press conferences by everybody there. So really for Keir Starmer, this is an open goal. He just gets to meet everyone. He gets to set the agenda in terms of talking about the key talking points he wants. We've been talking about this reset with Europe. Well, he'll get to shout about that. Keir Starmer will be giving a press conference at tea time, which will be on the telly, and he'll get to say what a wonderful summit it was. And I don't suppose we'll hear very much from anybody else about it. And therefore, if Starmer says it's wonderful, then it was wonderful. And so I think he'll be very grateful for Rishi Sunak for this lovely opportunity in Oxfordshire today.
I was talking to one European ambassador from a prominent country, and they just went, what was Rishi Sunak thinking with setting the date of the election on July the 4th? Because that means he passed up the opportunity to go to NATO and look statesmanlike, the opportunity to host the Euros with all the kind of potential goodwill that comes with that, and this summit. They thought it was bonkers.
Sam, if Rishi Sunak had scored the winning goal in the Euros final, he still would not have won that general election. Let's face it. I'm not sure that this summit would have saved him.
But as the conversation last night at the Carlton Club amongst defeated Tory MPs showed, they're all still licking their wounds specifically over the date. So it doesn't mean it's not a subject that the Tories beat themselves up on. But just to stick on the summit for a couple of minutes, I think that there are going to be 2 or 3 big moments at this summit. One is the press conference that Keir Starmer will give. And I think he's quite keen to show early progress with the EU. The danger of all these diplomatic summits is that they can end up with kind of windy conclusions, although there's no formal communique, as you say. But given that Keir Starmer is signalling hard that migration is a key priority today, I actually think he'll have something to pull out of the bag. And I think the Times have sort of got ahead of it this morning, and I think they're right. I think there will be some form of returns agreement that Keir Starmer will want to trumpet. I think it'll come with, I think there's an £84 million returns agreement that basically diplomats and Sherpas at this summit want to get over the line in time for Keir Starmer to announce round about 5 o'clock. So that's one big moment. Another big moment will be him alongside Giorgia Meloni, the Italian premier. That's important because she's the figure that other Europeans are most worried about. And when Rishi Sunak was going to be hosting this meeting, they feared it would be a kind of a Sunak-Meloni double act. Starmer is doing this event with Meloni, but they're expecting a very different tone and a very different role for her, which is something that's going down very well. And then one of the other big things tonight will be the dinner between Keir Starmer and President Macron. Really, the kind of UK-France stuff is being billed in Whitehall as a sort of mini summit alongside the European political community. It's resetting relationships with France in particular, I think, is seen as a key goal. And that's before you get the kind of appearance today and tomorrow of President Zelensky, who I think actually is going to pop up at this summit and dominate about 24 hours worth of pictures, if that happens, with quite a lot planned for him around Ukrainian security into tomorrow.
Yeah, and some suggestion we might actually get a Zelensky press conference as well, although that's not been confirmed. Very interesting that Keir Starmer, he's hosting all these leaders, but he's chosen Macron as the guy he wants to stick around and have a private dinner with afterwards. Of course, the big win for Starmer would be some sort of small boats deal with Macron, something better than Rishi Sunak or any of the previous Tory prime ministers could get, and I'm sure they'll be talking about that tonight, as well as defence and, of course, about Donald Trump.
Just very quickly on what's achievable, talking to European diplomats, there could be within months scope to do, because it doesn't take any changes of legal text, something on, say, for instance, youth mobility, which is something that I think Labour, the restrictions on young people going abroad to the continent, I think Labour are quite keen to be able to show progress on that. However, one thing that is quite important to Keir Starmer and is the basis we understand for him doing that deal that secured Sir Elton John's kind of endorsement just before election day. I'm told it's going to be very tricky to do something that allows touring musicians greater freedom. Now, I think Elton John was very keen to make it easier for him and his brethren to do concerts abroad. I'm told that requires a change to the legal text and is going to take a long time. So the big win for perhaps one of his biggest celebrity backers is quite a lot harder than you might want.
Good grief, it's 10 to 7 in the morning and Sam Coates is talking about Elton John. This is like some weird fever dream. I'm not sure I've woken up yet. Anyway, the big message Keir Starmer wants to get out is that this is a reset of Britain's relations with Europe. He's been saying it again and again. He'll be saying it at the top of his press conference, I'm sure. That is the key thing. There was a sort of suggestion that this would be a chance for Starmer to start negotiating some sort of new deal with Europe, particularly in defence and security. We know that's a priority for him. I don't think there's going to be very much negotiating happening today. Firstly, because he's hardly met any of these people, and a lot of today will literally be about meet and greet and warm words and establishing relationships. But also, importantly, because the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, is not coming to this summit. She can't go because there's a massive vote happening in Europe about re-electing her into her position. So she's had to pull out, which means that, the person you actually need to deal with in Brussels if you want to do some sort of EU agreement isn't going to be there today. However, there was a suggestion in the FT this week that one of the things they may be discussing today is setting up a formal UK-EU summit in the months ahead. That's not something that's happened since Britain left the EU, and that would be a bit of a coup for Starmer, because that would actually be an opportunity for a proper sit down and talk about some detailed negotiations on how Britain and Europe might work more closely together on trade, on veterinary checks and chemical regulations and defence and security and all the things that Labour have been talking about, areas where they think the UK and the EU could work more closely together. So that's another thing to watch out for today, if there's any movement or announcement on that. But the big message will be Britain is going closer to Europe again. Britain is friends with Europe again. Here we are in the birthplace of Winston Churchill, the proponent of European cooperation. That's the imagery they want. Probably don't want to mention that Blenheim Palace is named after the Battle of Blenheim, where an English-led army defeated the French and the Bavarians in a famous victory. Probably be skirting over that little history lesson while they're standing there in the palace tonight.
The other thing that I think they are going to skirt over is, of course, the vibe of this is, look how close they all are. Look how well we all get on. Look at us all in a room with photographs and hobnobbing at very close proximity, which could be a problem, because one of the big overnight stories is that President Biden of the US has COVID. And that's the same President Biden that saw quite a lot of the people in the rooms in Blenheim Palace today in person just a few days ago.
At the NATO summit.
At the NATO summit.
The super spreader event.
Could this turn into a super spreader event? Let's hope not. But I wouldn't be surprised if there was some jitters in Whitehall. But whether or not that extends to making people take COVID tests, I very much doubt it, because I suspect the attitude really is that everybody just doesn't want to know, will close their eyes, pretend that isn't a thing, and just hope for the best. But there's no way that US politics doesn't infect everything that's going on in the room today. I just flicked on to the New York Times, Jack. And let me just read you the first three headlines on the New York Times site. Number one, Joe Biden is more receptive to hearing pleas to exit the race. President Biden has given no indication that he's changing his mind about running, but is said to be more willing to listen to the case for bowing out. Story 2, Joe Biden tests positive for COVID. And story 3, nearly 2/3 of Democrats said that President Biden should drop out of the presidential race, according to a new poll. Crikey, the sort of shifts in the international political scene, particularly what's going on in America, will cast a long shadow over what's going on in Oxfordshire.
It's hard to imagine Joe Biden's sort of year going any worse. Now he's had to pull out of a speech last night because of COVID. The pressure on him is ramping back up again. It all sort of damped down for a few days after the attempted assassination of Donald Trump at the weekend, unsurprisingly. But big names amongst the Democrat Party are coming out against him now in public. Adam Schiff, who's a very senior congressman, came out last night saying the president should pass the torch. Nancy Pelosi is sort of letting it be known that she'd quite like him to go. There are suggestions that Chuck Schumer and other senior Democrats in Congress are telling Biden he needs to go. Biden, listen to this quote from Joe Biden. As he said, there's no suggestion that he is going to step down, but someone asked him, are there circumstances where you would? And he said, if I had some medical condition that emerged, if doctors came to me and said, you got this problem and that problem, is that a possible ramp-off for Joe Biden? Is it just possible that there is a route out of this for Joe Biden where a medical emergency or something just allows him to depart the stage with honour. I don't know. It still feels unlikely to me. The Republicans, I suspect, are very much hoping he stays in the race, given all the polling and given the way he's now performing. And chief among them now is J.D. Vance, the new vice presidential pick, who gave his first big speech as potential Veep at the Republican National Convention last night in Milwaukee. And it's quite impressive, the story he can tell. You can see watching it why Trump picked this guy. He's this sort of hillbilly background. He's got this extraordinary story of rural working class roots, which really will connect with large parts of America in a way that Donald Trump, well, he connects in a different way, but he certainly hasn't got that sort of backstory. And you can see why Vance is an appealing figure to stand alongside Trump. And this guy's under 40. He's going to be around for a long time to come. He didn't say anything mean about Britain, which is a good start for Britain, as he has done in the past. But he certainly talked about no free rides for nations that betray the generosity of the American taxpayer. Expect plenty of pressure on NATO at best if these guys get in November. And just one more thing popping up on my Twitter feed, Sam, at 5:49 a.m. Who's that smiling and chatting to J.D. Vance after the speech? It's Liz Truss. Remember her? Another former Prime Minister posing for a photo op with the Trumpeters. So we had Boris Johnson yesterday with Trump himself. Now here we have Truss with J.D. Vance. So who knows? Maybe we'll get Theresa May on Friday with one of the others. I doubt it.
Well, I'm no doubt warning him about the deep state. It's interesting how people shift when these appointments are made. I'm led to understand that one of the people that worked as hard as anybody to talk Donald Trump out of picking J.D. Vance was Rupert Murdoch. Yet in the early hours of the morning, he was there sitting at the in the convention arena in his suite watching the speech alongside Senator Lindsey Graham, who also tried to talk Trump out of choosing J.D. Vance. As in Britain, when there's an uncomfortable pick, once it's happened, everybody kind of moves to forget their objections and endorse what's in front of them. But I thought that was quite an interesting detail.
And worth saying, we were talking yesterday about David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, and about his attempts to sort of woo J.D. Vance over the last few months. Well, he is out on a big broadcast round this morning. They'll probably be happening while you're listening to this podcast, if you're quick off the mark and listen to it as soon as it drops. And it'll be interesting to see what he has to say about that. We don't hear a great deal of broadcast from David Lammy, so I will be watching that for news events as well this morning. But let's quickly talk about more domestic stuff, Sam. There's a couple of big public inquiry things happening today. Two of the big winners of the general election, the UK election, Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, Mr. Paddleboard, Mr. Bungee Jump, Mr. Cuddly social care guy, is going to get a grilling at the post office inquiry today, and he must be dreading this. We know Ed Davey has had the finger pointed at him, amongst other former ministers, other former post office ministers, for failing to spot or failing to do anything about this horrific scandal, the Horizon scandal. He will be on the stand today being grilled about that and no doubt apologising, and it's going to be grim footage for him. Pat McFadden as well, former Labour Post Office Minister, now one of the most powerful people in the country. He's had this amazing resurgence under Keir Starmer and is now in the so-called quad of people making key decisions in the UK government, one of the very top ministers in the UK government. He too will have to explain why he didn't do more to take action about this scandal in the late noughties when he was in government. And so, it's going to be a pretty tricky morning for him as well.
What's going to be interesting, particularly for Pat McFadden, given that his Cabinet Office role, part of his job is interacting with the civil service. Look, the line of defence that these guys are likely to run is the civil service told me not to interrogate too hard, effectively, the bosses of an independent arm's length Quango. Right, so there's a world in which the key thing that these guys say is it was all Whitehall's fault. We were told don't touch this. But if you're overseeing the civil service, overseeing the Cabinet Office, is it really that easy to run that line of defence? We ought to just mention the COVID inquiry first report. Finally, it's been called an interim report, but this will effectively be the definitive report on how prepared the UK was or wasn't for a pandemic. It's coming out at midday. And it's called Resilience and Preparedness, and it'll pop up on the website then. And the chair of the inquiry, Baroness Heather Hellett, will present her recommendations sort of live on a live stream. And I think that will feel like quite a big moment, even though the kind of COVID inquiry's gone quiet for a bit. You will hear her statement. You will hear from some of the families alongside the TUC and the British Medical Association at a news conference at 3. And I think this will pick over not just the decisions of Boris Johnson in the immediate run-up, but more likely the kind of decade or decades of kind of sort of sanding down Britain's ability to be prepared and decisions taken over a long period that meant that Britain was caught on the hop, not unlike other European countries.
I think of all the things we've talked about today, this is the thing that's probably going to be leading the evening news bulletins. I think this is actually a very big moment. As you say, this isn't the one that's going to take aim at Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings and all those people. This is the sort of Tory era. This is David Cameron. This is Jeremy Hunt. This is George Osborne. This is people who were supposed to have the country ready for this sort of thing. And I do remember Britain sort of boasting we were the best prepared country for a pandemic in the world. We had this fabulous pandemic plan for a completely different type of virus, and it didn't seem to have occurred to anybody in Whitehall that there might be a coronavirus coming for us. And I think Whitehall as a whole is going to get hauled over the coals today, and I think this is going to be pretty grim reading for the government. And I think there'll be bereaved families when the report is announced, making statements and so on. The visual impact of it, given the context of so many people who've died, so many people's lives were ruined, still people recovering, is going to be pretty bleak indeed. And I would think Whitehall is hunkered down and braced for a pretty rocky afternoon and some pretty grim headlines on the evening news bulletins.
It's 3 minutes past 7. Which means we've run out of time for the Conservatives, who will announce the timetable for their leadership election later today. Sorry, Conservatives. We don't have an episode on Fridays because otherwise we'll just collapse. But we will be back
Fridays.
On Monday.
It's Free Time Fridays.
Free Time Fridays.
Sorry, everyone.
But we will, or lucky everybody, depending on your point of view. There goes the coffee machine. Here's the cat. If you've heard the snoring, then apologies, but he decided to take up residence.
Cat. I wish we'd just start putting out the video of these Zooms with your enormous furry cat wandering around on it. That's cute.
And we've got next week, Monday to Thursday, which will be the last week before the break of Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily. We will see you then.
See you on Monday morning. Thanks very much for listening. Bye-bye.